My mom works all night, but her boss still hasn't paid her. The little girl said it in a very soft voice, as if she was just telling an ordinary story. No one in the quiet convenience store at midnight seemed to notice, except the man standing in front of her. A tall man in a black suit, his shirt stained with blood, with cold eyes that made anyone who looked at him quickly look away. In this city, people call him by many names, but the one name that makes the entire underworld fall silent is Simple the Mafia boss. No one dares to talk to him. No one dares to look him straight in the eyes, except the little girl holding a worn-out teddy bear. She doesn't know who he is. She doesn't know how dangerous he is. She only knows. Her mother is very tired. Then the little girl looks up straight into the eyes of the most powerful man in the room and says something that makes him freeze in place. That very moment would change both of their lives forever. But what no one expected was this. Why, only a few minutes later would that infamous mafia boss decide to do something that would shock the entire city. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on the quiet power of kindness, especially when no one else chooses to show it. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Which city and country are you in, and what time is it there right now? It's always amazing to see how stories like this connect people from all over this world. If moments like this remind you of the beauty of humanity, please like the video and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more powerful stories that celebrate compassion, courage, and the simple acts of kindness that can change life. The night air in Newark carried the sharp bite of early October 2025, the kind of cold that slipped under collars and made fingers ache even inside pockets. Streetlights buzzed overhead on Ferry Street in the ironbound district, casting long, wavering shadows across cracked sidewalks littered with discarded coffee cups and crumpled fast food wrappers. A 24-hour bodega glowed at the corner like a lone beacon, its fluorescent sign flickering open in red and blue. Inside the shelves were half-stocked with off-brand cereals, dusty bags of rice, and rows of lottery tickets no one ever seemed to win. Vincent Moretti pushed through the glass door with his left shoulder, careful not to jostle the right side of his body where fresh blood had already soaked through the dark wool of his overcoat. The wound burned like fire under his ribs, a clean through and through from a 9mm round fired by someone he had once called brother. He kept his breathing shallow, measured the way a man learns to do when pain threatens to betray him. At 47, Vinny still moved with the controlled grace of someone who had spent decades commanding rooms without raising his voice, but tonight the effort cost him. Sweat beaded on his fair skin despite the chill. His blue eyes, usually sharp and unreadable, were clouded with something deeper than physical hurt. He needed painkillers, strong ones, the kind that came in small white bottles behind the counter. He needed them fast, before the edges of his vision grayed out completely. Behind the register, the clerk, an older man with tired eyes, barely looked up from his phone. Vinny placed a 20 on the scratched Formica and muttered ibuprofen extra strength, and a bottle of water. As the clerk turned to the shelf, a small figure appeared at the end of the candy aisle. She could not have been more than 9, thin as a reed in a faded pink hoodie, 2 sizes too big jeans, worn pale at the knees, sneakers with soles peeling away. Her dark hair was pulled into uneven ponytails, strands escaping like they had given up trying to stay neat. She clutched a crumpled $5 bill in one hand and a half-gallon of milk in the other, the plastic jug almost too heavy for her arms. She stopped when she saw him. Vinny felt her gaze before he saw it steady, unafraid, in a way that made no sense for a child alone at this hour. He glanced sideways, her eyes wide and brown, fixed on the dark stain spreading across his coat. She tilted her head slightly as if puzzling out a difficult math problem. "Mister," she said softly, her voice carrying the faint lilt of someone raised in these streets, but still holding on to politeness like a lifeline. "You're bleeding. A lot." Vinny's jaw tightened. He did not answer. Children did not speak to him like that. Adults barely did. The clerk returned with the bottle and water. Vinny paid without looking away from the girl. She set the milk on the counter beside his items, fished in her pocket for coins, counted them carefully, pennies, nickels, a single quarter, then pushed the money forward. "Wait," she said to the clerk, then turned back to Vinny. "You need help. My mom cleans offices at night. She knows how to fix cuts. She's really good at it." Vinny exhaled through his nose, a sound that might have been amusement or warning. "Kid, go home." She did not move. Instead, she stepped closer, close enough that he caught the faint scent of cheap strawberry shampoo, and something else. Hunger, maybe, or the stale air of a place that never quite warmed up. Her small face was pale shadows under her eyes, like bruises that had not yet formed. Malnutrition had sharpened her cheekbones too early. Her wrists looked fragile enough to snap. "I'm Sophia," she said, as if names could make strangers less dangerous. "My mom says bad things happen to people who don't get help when they're hurt. Even people who look scary." Vinny felt something twist inside him, sharp and unwelcome. Guilt, perhaps, the old familiar kind that never quite left, no matter how many years he spent burying it under power and control. He had seen children like her before, too many. Thin, watchful, carrying burdens no 9-year-old should know. He had told himself long ago that his world did not touch them, that the money he funneled into schools and food banks kept the line drawn. But here one stood staring at his blood as if it were just another problem to solve. The clerk cleared his throat. Everything okay? Vinny ignored him. He looked down at Sophia. Your mom sent you out alone at this hour. Sophia's gaze dropped to the floor for the first time. She had to work late. The landlord said, if we don't pay extra by tomorrow. Her voice trailed off. She swallowed. We might have to leave. Again. The words landed like stones in still water. Vinny knew the script slumlords squeezing tenants late-night shifts that paid pennies, children running errands because parents could not afford to miss a single hour. He had grown up hearing it, living it before he clawed his way out with fists and ambition and choices most people never faced. He should have walked away. Every instinct honed over decades screamed at no attachments, no liabilities, no soft spots. But the girl lifted her eyes again, and something in them, quiet determination mixed with bone-deep exhaustion, reached past every wall he had built. The door chime rang. 2 men stepped in hard faces, leather jackets, eyes scanning the store like predators. Vinny recognized the type, immediately low-level muscle from the Esposito crew, the rival family that had been testing boundaries for months. They saw him froze for half a second, then one smirked. Moretti, the taller one, said, voice low but carrying. You look like hell. Need a hand getting home. Vinny's hand moved instinctively toward the concealed holster under his coat, but pain flared white-hot across his side. He straightened, slowly forcing calm. Not tonight, boys. Sophia edged closer to him without seeming to realize it, her small body pressing lightly against his leg as if seeking shelter. The gesture was so instinctive, so trusting, that it nearly undid him. Inside, turmoil surged. Rage at the men for daring to show up here, shame that a child felt safer near a bleeding criminal than alone, and something sharper remorse, raw and gnawing for every life his choices had indirectly touched. The shorter man laughed, once brittle. Boss says hello. Says maybe you should stay out of Ironbound for a while. Vinny met their eyes. Tell your boss if he wants a message delivered, he sends someone who can carry it without pissing himself. Tension crackled. The clerk backed toward the stockroom door. Sophia's hand found the edge of Vinny's coat fingers curling into the fabric. She did not cry or run. She simply held on small and steady. The taller man took a step forward. Vinny shifted his weight, ready to end this if it came to it, wound be damned. But the pain spiked again, vision blurring at the edges. He swayed just a fraction, but enough. Sophia's voice cut through, soft but clear. Please don't fight. He's hurt already. The words hung in the air. The 2 men exchanged glances, uncertain now. A bleeding mafia boss was one thing. A bleeding mafia boss with a child clinging to him was something else, messy, unpredictable, the kind of scene that drew questions nobody wanted. The taller one spat on the floor. This ain't over, Moretti. They backed out, door chime jangling behind them. Silence settled heavy and thick. The clerk exhaled shakily. Sophia did not let go. Vinny looked down at her. Her face was pale, lips pressed tight, but her eyes held no fear, only worry. For him. Something inside Vinny cracked a fracture he had not felt in years. Guilt roared up, mixed with a fierce protective instinct he could not name. This girl, this thin, hungry, impossibly brave girl, had just stood between him and trouble without hesitation. And in her eyes he saw not just a child, but a mirror of every vulnerability he had spent a lifetime crushing. He knelt slowly, ignoring the fire in his side. Their faces were level now. Sophia, he said, voice rough but gentle. You shouldn't be here. She shook her head. You need help. I can get my mom. She's close. Please. Vinny stared at her. The bodega lights hummed overhead. Outside, the wind rattled the door. Inside him, conflict tore like a storm. Walk away and preserve the cold order of his world, or follow this child and risk everything he had built. He reached into his coat slowly, carefully, and pulled out his keys. Get in the car outside. Black SUV. I'll follow you to your place. Sophia's eyes widened. For the first time, uncertainty flickered. You promise you won't hurt us? The question stabbed deeper than any bullet. Vinny felt the weight of every sin he had ever committed pressing down. I promise, he said, and the words tasted like truth. She studied him a long moment, then nodded once. She picked up the milk jug again, struggling with its weight, and walked toward the door. Vinny watched her go small silhouette against the night. Inside, the storm raged harder, remorse for the life he led, guilt for the children like her who lived in its shadow, and a sudden, overwhelming surge of something he had not felt in decades, the fierce need to protect. He paid the clerk, pocketed the pills, and stepped into the cold. The SUV waited at the curb engine already running. Sophia stood beside it waiting. As he approached, she looked up. "Thank you," she whispered. Vinny opened the passenger door for her. "No," he said quietly. "Thank you." The door closed with a soft click. He slid behind the wheel, pain forgotten for the moment. The engine growled to life. And in that ordinary, extraordinary instant, the line between his world and hers began to blur. The black SUV rolled slowly down the narrow side streets of the iron-bound headlights, cutting pale tunnels through the October darkness of 2025. Vinny kept both hands on the wheel knuckles white, forcing his breathing to stay even, while the wound under his ribs throbbed in time with his pulse. Every bump in the road sent fresh fire through his side, but he welcomed the pain. It kept him sharp, kept the edges of shock from closing in. Beside him, Sophia sat very straight, the milk jug balanced carefully on her lap like it was made of glass. She had not spoken since they left the bodega. Her small fingers traced invisible patterns on the plastic handle, round and round, a nervous rhythm that spoke louder than words. The dashboard lights painted her face in soft blue, two thin, two pale eyes, enormous in the dim glow. Vinny stole glances when he thought she would not notice. Each look tightened something in his chest, a vice he could not name. She directed him with quiet murmurs left here straight past the laundromat, the brown building with the broken buzzer, until they pulled up in front of a 4-story walk-up that looked one hard winter away from condemnation. Graffiti scarred the brick. Windowsills sagged under layers of peeling paint. A single bulb burned above the entrance, flickering like it was tired of trying. Trash bags leaned against the stoop, torn open by raccoons or desperate neighbors. The wind carried the sour smell of garbage and diesel. Vinny killed the engine. Silence rushed in. Sophia turned to him. "You can park here. Nobody will bother your car. They know better." He almost smiled at that small, fierce pride in a voice barely louder than a whisper. Instead, he nodded. "Lead the way." She climbed out first milk jug cradled against her chest. Vinny followed more slowly, one hand pressed to his side beneath the coat. The cold bit deeper, now seeping through the wool, finding the wet fabric and the torn flesh beneath. He ignored it. He had walked through worse. Inside the stairwell, the smell thickened old cooking oil mildew, faint traces of cigarette smoke that had soaked into the plaster years ago. The steps creaked under their weight. Sophia took them carefully, one hand on the railing that wobbled with every touch. On the second-floor landing, a baby cried behind a thin door. On the third, someone shouted in rapid Spanish words too fast to catch. Sophia did not flinch. She simply kept climbing. At the 4th-floor hallway, she stopped in front of apartment 4B. The brass numbers hung crooked. One screw was missing. She set the milk down, fished a key from the pocket of her hoodie, and unlocked the door with practiced quiet. The apartment opened into a single room that served as everything kitchen, living space, bedroom. A bare bulb hung from the ceiling, throwing harsh shadows. The walls had once been cream. Now they were stained yellow-brown from years of cigarette smoke and leaking pipes. A small table stood against one wall, 3 mismatched chairs around it. A mattress lay in the corner on the floor, covered with a thin blanket and a single pillow. No couch. No television. A tiny hot plate sat on the counter beside a half-loaf of white bread, wrapped in plastic, and a jar of peanut butter with a knife stuck in it. Elena stood at the sink back to them, scrubbing a plate with furious concentration. She was 32 but looked older, hollow cheeks, dark circles carved beneath her eyes, hair pulled into a tight knot that had begun to unravel. Her shoulders were narrow bones, sharp under the faded gray sweatshirt. She moved with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had long ago stopped expecting rest. When the door clicked shut, she turned. Her eyes found Sophia, first relief, then alarm. Then they found Vinny. The plate slipped from her fingers and shattered on the linoleum. Sophia stepped forward quickly. "Mom, it's okay. He's hurt. I told him you could help." Elena's gaze locked on the blood, soaking through Vinny's coat. Recognition hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back one step, hand flying to her mouth. Color drained from her face so fast it left her gray. "You," she whispered. Vinny stood motionless in the doorway. The room seemed to shrink around them. He felt the weight of her stare, shock, fear, something deeper and more dangerous, old memory rising like bile. Sophia looked between them, confused. Mom Elena shook her head once sharply. "Sophia, go to the bathroom. Close the door." But now, Sophia hesitated, then obeyed small feet, padding across the floor. The bathroom door clicked shut. Silence stretched thin and brittle. Elena's voice came out barely audible. "Get out." Vinny did not move. "She brought me here. Said you know first aid." I don't care what she said. Elena's hands trembled at her sides. "You don't belong here. You never did." Inside Vinny, something tore wider. He had spent years convincing himself the past stayed buried clean, break no loose ends. but here it stood, thin, exhausted, staring at him with eyes full of every regret he had tried to outrun. "I'm bleeding," he said quietly. "Bad enough I might not make it home." Elena laughed once, a short, broken sound. "That's not my problem." But her gaze dropped to his side again, and he saw the conflict flicker across her face, the same conflict he felt burning in his own chest. She was tired, so tired, and yet the instinct to help had not died in her, not completely. Vinny took one careful step forward. "Your daughter stood between me and two men with guns tonight. Didn't flinch. Just held on." Elena's breath caught. "She's 9. She's brave," Vinny said. "Braver than most men I know." Tears welled in Elena's eyes, sudden and furious. She dashed them away with the back of her hand. "Don't talk about her like you know her. You don't get to do that." Vinny felt the words land like punches. Remorse surged, violent and choking. He had walked away once 10 years ago, telling himself it was mercy. Leave the girl alone. Leave the woman alone. Keep them clean of his world. But mercy had left them here, cold apartment, empty cupboards, a child running errands at midnight because rent loomed like a guillotine. He reached into his coat slowly and pulled out the thick envelope he always carried for emergencies. He set it on the table without flourish. $2,000, he said. Cash. For rent. For food. Whatever you need. Elena stared at the envelope as if it might bite. "I don't want your money. You need it." Her laugh cracked again. "What I need is for people to stop thinking they can buy their way out of guilt." Vinny met her gaze. "I'm not buying anything. I'm paying a debt." Elena's knees buckled slightly. She caught herself on the counter. "You think money fixes this? You think it erases 10 years? "No," Vinny said softly. "But it keeps the lights on tonight." Outside tires screeched on the street below, too fast, too deliberate. Vinny tensed. Through the thin window he saw a dark sedan slow at the curb headlights, sweeping the building face. The same two men from the bodega, watching. Elena followed his gaze. Fear flashed across her features, raw animal. Vinny moved before he thought. He stepped to the window, pulled the curtain aside just enough. The sedan idled, engine rumbling. One man leaned out the passenger window, scanning the stoop. Vinny turned back to Elena. "They followed us." Her face went blank with terror. "Why?" "Because I'm here." Elena pressed a hand to her stomach as if she might be sick. "Get out. Now." Vinny shook his head. "Not until I know you're safe." Downstairs, car doors slammed. Vinny felt the familiar cold settle over him, the operational calm that had kept him alive for decades. But beneath it, the storm raged harder, guilt clawing at his throat, remorse for every choice that had led to this moment, and a fierce, burning need to shield the child in the next room, and the woman who had once looked at him with something like hope. Elena stared at him, eyes wide with confusion and dawning horror. "You brought this to my door." The accusation struck deep. Vinny felt something inside him fracture further, violent, irreparable. He had told himself he was protecting them by staying away. Instead, he had left them defenseless against the very world he ruled. He stepped closer, slow, careful. "I'm not leaving you alone with them outside." Elena backed up until her spine met the counter. Tears spilled freely now. "Why are you doing this?" Vinny searched her face. The answer rose unbidden, raw and undeniable. "Because she's mine," he said quietly. "Isn't she?" Elena's breath stopped. The room tilted. For a long moment, neither moved. Then from the bathroom, Sophia's small voice called through the door, timid, polite, trembling. "Mom, is everything okay?" Elena closed her eyes. A single tear tracked down her cheek. Vinny waited. Outside footsteps climbed the stairs, slow, deliberate. Inside, the silence stretched until it hurt. And in that suspended heartbeat, Vinny understood with brutal clarity the line he had drawn so carefully had never existed. It had only waited, patient, inevitable, for the moment it would dissolve. The footsteps on the stairs grew louder. Deliberate, unhurried, the sound of men who knew no one would dare stop them. Vinny stood motionless in the center of the tiny apartment coat, still buttoned over the spreading stain, one hand resting lightly near his hip where the holster waited. Elena remained pressed against the counter, arms wrapped around herself as though the thin sweatshirt could shield her from what was coming. The single bulb overhead swayed slightly in the draft from the cracked window, throwing their shadows long and jagged across the worn linoleum. Sophia's voice came again from behind the bathroom door, smaller this time, edged with worry. "Mom," Elena's gaze darted to the door, then back to Vinny. Something fractured in her expression, fear giving way to a desperate, exhausted resolve. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps, opened the bathroom door just enough to pull Sophia out, then closed it again. She knelt, cupping her daughter's face in trembling hands. "Stay right here," she whispered. "Don't move. Don't speak unless I say." Sophia nodded, eyes wide, but she did not cry. Instead, she looked past her mother to Vinny. The trust in her gaze, quiet, unwavering, cut deeper than any accusation Elena could have spoken. Vinny felt the room tilt again, a slow, nauseating spin that had nothing to do with blood loss. Inside him, the storm howled louder, remorse clawing at the walls of his chest, guilt roaring that he had brought this danger to their door, and beneath it all, a fierce, burning protectiveness that felt both foreign and inevitable. He had spent years building an empire on distance, emotional, physical, moral. Attachments were liabilities. Yet here, in this freezing apartment that smelled of damp plaster and yesterday's soup, a 9-year-old girl looked at him as though he were safety itself. The knock came 3 sharp raps, polite in the way predators can be polite. Elena straightened. Her voice when she spoke was soft but steady. "Who is it?" A man's voice answered from the hallway, calm, almost friendly. "Building maintenance, ma'am. Got a report of a leak in 4B. Need to check the pipes before it floods the floor below." Elena's eyes met Vinny's. They both knew it was a lie. Vinny moved first. He stepped to the door, motioning Elena and Sophia back. His voice came out low, controlled. "Open it. I'll handle this." Elena hesitated, then nodded once. She turned the knob slowly. The door swung inward to reveal the 2 men from the bodega. The taller one smiled, thin-practiced. His partner stood slightly behind, hands loose at his sides but ready. "Evening," the taller one said. His eyes flicked past Elena to Vinny. "Didn't expect company." Vinny did not smile back. "You're a long way from Esposito territory." The man shrugged. "Boss likes to keep an eye on old friends, especially when they're bleeding all over the neighborhood." Sophia edged closer to her mother's leg. Elena placed a protective hand on her shoulder, fingers digging in slightly. Vinny felt the shift inside him, the cold operational calm locking into place over the emotional chaos. But the chaos did not vanish. It burned hotter, more violently. These men were not here for him alone. They were here because he was here. Because he had stepped into this world of thin blankets and empty refrigerators. Because he had failed 10 years ago and again tonight to keep his shadow from falling across the only innocents who had ever looked at him without calculation. "Walk away," Vinny said quietly. "Tonight. No one gets hurt." The taller man's smile faded. "Can't do that. Orders are orders." Vinny's hand moved slow, deliberate to the envelope still lying on the table. He picked it up, held it out. "Take this." Consider it a gesture. Then leave. The man glanced at the envelope, then back at Vinny. "You think cash buys silence. I think it buys time," Vinny replied. "Time for you to decide if tonight's worth dying over." Tension thickened the air. The hallway light flickered once. Outside, a distant siren wailed, then faded. The shorter man shifted his weight. "We're not here for money." Vinny met his eyes. "Then you're here for trouble." Elena's breath hitched audibly. Sophia pressed closer, small body trembling now, not from cold but from the sudden understanding that the man who had promised safety might not be able to keep it. Vinny felt the fracture widen inside him, violent tearing. He had told himself for years that power meant control, that control meant safety for those he cared about. But power had only ever bought distance, and distance had left Elena and Sophia to shiver through winters without heat to count pennies for milk to learn fear far too young. The taller man took a single step forward. Vinny moved faster than the pain should have allowed. He closed the distance in one stride, hand clamping around the man's wrist, not hard enough to break bone, but firm enough to make the point. "Last chance." The man froze. His partner tensed, hand drifting toward his coat. Vinny's voice dropped to a whisper only the 2 men could hear. "You touch them, you don't walk out of this building." For a long moment, no one breathed. Then the taller man exhaled, jerked his wrist free, and stepped back. "This isn't over, Moretti." Vinny did not reply. He simply held the door open wider. The men retreated down the hall, footsteps fading. The stairwell door banged shut below. Silence returned heavier than before. Elena sagged against the wall, knees buckling. She slid down until she sat on the floor, arms wrapped around Sophia, who had begun to shake in earnest. Quiet sobs escaped the girl, soft contained the sound of a child who had learned crying too loudly brought trouble. Vinny closed the door, locked it, leaned his forehead against the wood for one brief second while the room spun. Then he turned. Elena looked up at him, eyes red, face streaked. "Why?" she whispered. "Why now?" Vinny crossed the room slowly. He knelt careful of the wound, careful of the distance he still tried to keep, and met her gaze. "Because I left," he said. 10 years ago. I left because I thought it was kinder, because my world destroys everything it touches." His voice cracked on the last word. "I was wrong." Elena stared at him. Shock, confusion, old hurt, all of it swirling behind her eyes. "You don't get to decide that now." "I know." Vinny reached out hesitant until his fingers brushed Sophia's hair. The girl flinched at first, then stilled. "But I'm here tonight, and I'm not leaving until I know you're safe." Sophia lifted her head. Tears clung to her lashes. "You're still bleeding," she said softly. "Mom can fix it. She's really good." Elena closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, something had shifted, resignation perhaps, or the first fragile thread of trust. She stood. "Come to the table. Sit." Vinny obeyed. He shrugged off his coat, wincing as fabric peeled away from torn skin. Blood had soaked his white shirt crimson. The wound itself was an angry gash just below the ribs. Elena fetched a battered first aid kit from under the sink, bandages yellowed with age, half-empty bottle of hydrogen peroxide, a roll of gauze that had seen better days. She worked in silence, cleaning the wound with steady hands that belied the tremor in her shoulders. Vinny watched her face, thin, exhausted, beautiful in the way only survivors are beautiful. Sophia stood beside him, small hand resting on his arm as though anchoring him. "Does it hurt a lot?" she asked. Vinny managed a faint smile. "Not as much as it should." Elena paused, peroxide-soaked cotton hovering above the wound. Her voice came out barely audible. "She looks like you." Around the eyes, Vinny's throat closed. He looked down at Sophia, at the sharp cheekbones, the stubborn set of her mouth, and felt the truth settle like lead in his chest. His daughter. His child. Hidden from him, not out of cruelty, but out of love, Elena's love protecting her from the life he had chosen. The realization struck with physical force. Remorse surged so violently he nearly doubled over. He had fathered a child and walked away, left her to grow up in a place where heat was a luxury, where dinner was sometimes only bread and water, where a mother worked until she dropped, so the landlord would not change the locks. Elena taped the last bandage in place. "You need rest. And a doctor." Vinny shook his head. "I need to make sure they don't come back." Outside, the wind howled against the window, rattling the loose pane. The radiator hissed once, then fell silent, no heat tonight. Elena stood back, wiping her hands on her sweatshirt. "You can't stay here." "I know." Vinny rose slowly. The room steadied. He looked at Sophia, at the way she watched him with wide, hopeful eyes, and felt the burning inside him flare brighter, love, fierce and immediate, the kind that rewrote every rule he had ever lived by. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and sent a single text to a man who owed him everything. Within minutes, tires rolled to a stop outside. Not the dark sedan. A sleek black Escalade windows-tinted engine, purring like restrained power. Vinny looked at Elena. "I'm taking you somewhere safe. Tonight, both of you." Elena's eyes widened. "We can't." "You can," Vinny said. "And you will." Sophia slipped her hand into his. Small fingers curled around his much larger ones. Elena stared at their joined hands. Tears spilled again, silent, unstoppable. Vinny felt them like rain on his own skin. He opened the door. The hallway waited empty, quiet. But the storm inside him raged on, guilt, remorse, love, all of it tearing him open, reshaping him in ways he could no longer control. And for the first time in decades, Vincent Moretti did not fight it. The Escalade waited at the curb like a black panther crouched in the shadows, engine idling so low it was felt more than heard. Tinted windows reflected the flickering streetlight above the tenement stoop. Chrome rims gleamed faintly despite the grime of the iron-bound streets. Vinny guided Sophia and Elena down the 4 flights of stairs with careful steps, his own wound protesting every movement. Elena's thin frame hunched forward as though carrying an invisible weight, Sophia clutching her mother's hand, and the milk jug in turns. Outside, the October wind of 2025 sliced sharper than before, carrying the distant rumble of a freight train across the Passaic River. Elena stopped at the bottom step, staring at the vehicle as though it were a trap disguised as salvation. "I can't get in that," she said quietly. Her voice trembled not from cold alone, but from the sudden vertigo of choices she had never imagined facing. "People will see. They'll talk." Vinny opened the rear door. The interior light spilled out soft leather seats, heated the faint scent of polished wood and expensive cologne, a stark, humiliating contrast to the cracked plastic milk jug still in Sophia's arms. "No one will see," he said. "And if they do, they won't speak." Elena's gaze dropped to the pavement. Her sneakers, once white, now gray, and splitting at the seams, shifted against concrete littered with broken glass and cigarette butts. She looked small against the gleaming vehicle, smaller still against the man who owned it. Malnutrition had carved hollows beneath her collarbones. Sleep deprivation painted purple shadows under her eyes. She had not eaten more than toast and weak tea in days, rationing what little remained so Sophia could have the last of the peanut butter. The humiliation of it burned in her chest, standing here penniless and powerless, while a stranger who once meant everything offered escape in the form of luxury she could not even imagine. Sophia tugged gently at her mother's sleeve. "Mom, it's warm inside. I can feel it from here." Elena closed her eyes. A single tear escaped, freezing almost instantly on her cheek in the wind. Vinny felt the sight like a blade twisting deeper. Remorse surged, violent, suffocating. He had walked away from this woman 10 years ago, believing he spared her his darkness. Instead, he had condemned her to nights spent wrapped in every blanket they owned, just to keep warm to mornings. Waking with hunger cramps so severe, she doubled over in the tiny bathroom to afternoons, counting change for bus fare while landlords changed locks without warning. And now he stood before her in a $10,000 coat, offering safety wrapped in the very wealth that had once seemed impossible. He knelt slowly, ignoring the fire in his side until he was eye level with Elena. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said softly. "I'm asking you to let me keep you safe tonight. Just tonight." Elena opened her eyes. They searched his face, fearful, guarded, curious despite herself. "And tomorrow," she whispered. "Tomorrow we figure out," Vinny answered. "But tonight no one touches you. No one threatens you. No one takes anything else away." Something in his voice, raw, unguarded, made her breath catch. She looked down at Sophia, whose small face was turned up toward Vinny with absolute burning trust. The girl's fingers still curled around his sleeve from earlier, as though letting go might break the fragile thread connecting them. Elena exhaled shakily. "Okay." Vinny helped them into the back seat. The door closed with a solid, expensive thunk. Warmth enveloped them immediately, heater vents purring, seats soft as clouds. Sophia let out a tiny, involuntary sigh of relief, shoulders dropping for the first time in what felt like years. Vinny slid behind the wheel. The Escalade pulled away smoothly, gliding past the tenement, as though it had never belonged there at all. They had traveled only 3 blocks when headlights flared behind them, too close, too bright. Vinny's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. The dark sedan from earlier, now joined by a second vehicle. Both accelerated. Elena noticed. Her hand tightened on Sophia's. "They're following." Vinny's jaw clenched. "I know." He turned left onto a narrower street, lined with shuttered warehouses. The sedan followed. Then the second car peeled off, attempting to cut ahead at the next intersection. Vinny braked hard. Tires squealed. The Escalade rocked but held steady. He glanced back at Elena and Sophia, both pale. Sophia's eyes enormous with sudden fear. "Hold on," he said quietly. He accelerated through the intersection just as the second car tried to block him. Metal scraped metal, a glancing blow. Nothing more, but the impact sent a jolt through the cabin. Sophia gasped. Elena pulled her daughter close. Vinny's heart hammered not from fear, but from the white-hot rage of a father realizing his child was in danger because of him. The conflict inside him tore wider guilt, screaming that he should have stayed away forever, love roaring that he would burn the city down before letting harm touch her again. He swerved right onto a deserted industrial lot, gravel crunching under tires. The 2 sedans pursued headlights, bouncing wildly. Vinny stopped abruptly in the center of the empty space, killed the engine, and stepped out. Elena's voice cracked from the back seat. "Don't I have to end this?" he said. "Stay inside." He walked forward into the glare of headlights, coat open now, bloodstains stark against white shirt posture, calm despite the pain. The drivers cut engines. Doors opened. 4 men emerged, hard faces, leather jackets, hands empty but ready. The taller one from the apartment stepped forward. "Moretti," he said, "you're making this harder than it needs to be." Vinny stopped 10 feet away. "You followed a woman and a child. That was your mistake." The man laughed, once short, nervous. "Boss wants a conversation. Nothing more." Vinny's voice remained even. "Conversation's over when you tail a 9-year-old. Silence stretched across the gravel. Wind whistled between rusted shipping containers. One of the men shifted. Another glanced toward the Escalade, where Elena's face was visible through the tinted glass, pale, terrified. Vinny felt the moment balance on a knife's edge. Inside him, the storm reached hurricane-force remorse for every life his world had poisoned, guilt for the terror in Elena's eyes, and a fierce, protective love for the child who had bandaged his wound with shaking hands and called him safe. He took 1 step closer. "Turn around. Drive away. Tell your boss the message is delivered." The taller man hesitated. His hand drifted toward his coat. Vinny's voice dropped. "Don't." The man froze. Something in Vinny's eyes, cold, absolute, made the decision for him. He raised both hands slowly. "We're gone," he said. The 4 men backed toward their cars. Engines roared to life. Headlights swung away. Tires spun on gravel. They disappeared into the night. Vinny stood motionless until the taillights vanished. Then he returned to the Escalade, opened the rear door, and looked at Elena and Sophia. Elena stared at him, shock, confusion, a dawning wonder she could not yet name. Sophia reached out first, small hand finding his. "You're shaking," she whispered. Vinny realized she was right. His hand trembled, not from cold, not from pain, but from the violent collision inside him, the man who ruled with iron control suddenly undone by a child's touch. He knelt again. I'm sorry, he said to both of them. I never wanted this to touch you. Elena's voice came out soft, broken. It already has. Vinny looked at her, really looked. The woman who had once laughed in sunlight now sat in a vehicle worth more than 10 years of her rent, eyes filled with exhaustion and the first fragile threads of trust. Before he could speak, a new sound cut the night tires on gravel again. Not the sedans. A single motorcycle engine snarling, circling the lot like a shark. Vinny stood. Stay here. He stepped away from the vehicle. The motorcycle slowed rider anonymous behind a dark visor. It stopped 20 feet away. The rider lifted the visor just enough to reveal a familiar face, one of his own men, eyes wide with urgency. Boss, the rider called. Esposito's moving on the tunnels tonight. They know you're here. They're coming for the building. Vinny felt ice slide down his spine. The tunnel's old smuggling routes beneath the tenement routes he had used years ago, routes Esposito now wanted to claim. He turned back to the Escalade. Elena had heard. Her face had gone gray. They'll evict us, she whispered. They've been waiting. The landlord said, if we miss one more payment. Vinny crossed to the open door. He looked at Sophia, small, trusting, terrified, and felt the final fracture give way. No one is taking your home, he said. Not tonight, not ever. He reached inside, lifted Sophia gently into his arms. She was so light it broke something fundamental inside him, then offered his free hand to Elena. Come with me, he said. Let me fix this. Elena stared at the offered hand. Tears spilled freely now, silent rivers of exhaustion, humiliation, hope. She placed her thin fingers in his. Vinny felt the contact like fire burning away, years of distance, years of denial. He helped her out, kept Sophia cradled against his chest, and led them back toward the Escalade. Behind them, the motorcycle engine revved once, then faded into the night. Inside Vinny, the storm had not quieted. It had only grown remorse, guilt, love, all of it, tearing him open, remaking him in the image of the father he had never believed he could be. And as the Escalade pulled away from the empty lot, leaving the tenement behind, Vinny understood with brutal clarity the past had not stayed buried. It had simply waited for the moment it could rise again, demanding everything. The Escalade moved through Newark's back streets like a shadow slipping between worlds, past rusted chain-link fences, abandoned factories with broken windows staring like empty eyes, and clusters of sodium streetlights that turned. The October night of 2025, the color of old brass. Vinny drove with deliberate calm, one hand steady on the wheel, the other pressed lightly against the fresh bandage beneath his shirt. The pain had dulled to a deep pulsing ache, but fever was beginning to creep in hot and insidious, blurring the edges of his thoughts. In the back seat, Elena sat, rigid arms wrapped around Sophia, as though the child might vanish if she let go. Sophia had fallen quiet after the confrontation in the lot. Now she rested her head against her mother's shoulder. Small fingers still tangled in the hem of Vinny's coat, where it draped across the seat between them. The interior lights had been dimmed to a soft glow. Warm air whispered from the vents, carrying the faint scent of leather, and the expensive aftershave Vinny wore without thinking a scent. Elena had once known intimately, one she had not smelled in 10 years. No one spoke for several blocks. The silence was not empty. It was thick with everything unsaid. Vinny glanced in the rearview mirror. Elena's eyes met his wide, shadowed, searching. She looked smaller than ever against the plush upholstery, her thin frame swallowed by the seat. Her sweatshirt sleeves were frayed at the cuffs. The fabric had pilled from too many washes in cold water to save on utilities. Beneath the exhaustion etched into her face lay something raw, the slow, humiliating realization that she had accepted help from the one person she had sworn never to need again. Sophia stirred. "Where are we going?" she asked, softly, voice polite, even in weariness. Vinny answered without hesitation. "Somewhere safe. A place no one will look for you tonight." Elena's fingers tightened on Sophia's shoulder. "We can't just disappear." "You're not disappearing," Vinny said. "You're resting. For one night. Then we talk about what comes next." Elena looked out the window at the passing street's familiar corners, where she had once pushed Sophia in a second-hand stroller, scavenged from curbside trash, where she had counted footsteps to stretch the last dollar for bus fare. The disparity pressed against her ribs like a physical weight, the heated leather beneath her, the quiet hum of the engine, the man in the driver's seat who could summon help with a single phone call while she had spent the last 3 winters taping plastic over cracked windows to keep out the wind. She closed her eyes against the sting of tears. The unfairness of it burned, how one life could fracture so completely, while another rose untouched. How she had worked double shifts until her hands bled from cleaning chemicals, only to come home to eviction notices slipped under the door like poison letters. How Sophia had learned at 7 to eat half portions so her mother could have something at all. Vinny watched her in the mirror. Each tremor that crossed her face struck him like a fresh wound. Remorse clawed deeper, violent, relentless. He had told himself leaving was protection. Instead, it had sentenced them to years of cold nights huddled under one thin blanket of Sophia, waking with hunger pangs so sharp. She cried silently so her mother would not hear of Elena standing in food bank lines, praying no one from the old neighborhood recognized her. The fever chose that moment to surge. Vinny's vision tunneled. Sweat broke across his forehead, cold despite the heat in the cabin. His grip on the wheel slackened. The Escalade drifted slightly toward the curb. Elena noticed instantly. "Vinny," he blinked hard. "I'm fine." "You're not." Her voice sharpened with sudden fear. "Pull over." He shook his head too quickly. The world tilted. Black spots danced at the edges of his sight. Sophia sat up straight. "Mom, he's shaking. Like really bad." Vinny tried to speak, but the words slurred. Pain flared white-hot through his side as infection finally overtook the makeshift bandage. He managed to guide the Escalade into an empty side street lined with shuttered warehouses, then braked hard. The vehicle rocked to a stop. He slumped forward, forehead resting against the steering wheel. Breathing came in shallow gasps. Elena unbuckled Sophia first, then herself. She climbed out into the cold, circled to the driver's side, and opened Vinny's door. He nearly fell out. She caught him under the arms with surprising strength born of desperation. "Help me," she said to Sophia. The girl scrambled out small hands, pressing against Vinny's back. Together they half-carried, half-dragged him to the rear of the vehicle. Elena opened the cargo area. The space was wide, lined with a folded wool blanket and emergency supplies items Vinny kept for his own world. Never imagining they would shelter a child and her mother, they eased him onto the blanket. Vinny's skin burned beneath Elena's touch. Fever had taken hold completely. His fair features were flushed, sweat matting, dark hair to his forehead. Sophia knelt beside him, small hands hovering uncertainly. "He's really hot," she whispered, "like when I had the flu last winter and we didn't have medicine." Elena peeled back the bandage. The wound wept pus, now red, angry, infected. She pressed the back of her hand to his cheek. He flinched at the contact, then leaned into it unconsciously. Tears filled Elena's eyes. "We need a hospital." "No hospitals," Vinny rasped. His voice was weak but clear enough. "They ask questions. Questions bring Esposito." Elena stared at him. "You'll die." Vinny managed a faint, bitter smile. "Not tonight." Sophia reached out, placed her small palm against his burning forehead. "You helped us," she said softly. "Now we help you." Vinny's throat closed. The simple words struck deeper than any bullet. Inside him the storm reached a crescendo guilt, screaming that he did not deserve this kindness, remorse tearing at him for every year he had been absent, and love fierce, immediate, consuming, flooding. Every crack the pain had opened. Elena worked quickly. She found antiseptic wipes in the emergency kit, cleaned the wound as best she could. Sophia tore strips from the blanket's edge with shaking hands, wrapping fresh gauze around his ribs. Vinny watched them through half-lidded eyes, the thin woman who had once loved him, the daughter he had never known, both of them pouring care into a man who had spent a lifetime dealing only in power. Elena's hands trembled as she tied the final knot. "This won't hold long," she whispered. "You need antibiotics. Real ones." Vinny caught her wrist gently. "Thank you." Elena pulled away as though burned. Tears spilled freely now. "Don't thank me. Just don't die in front of her." Sophia curled against Vinny's side, careful of the wound, her small body a warm weight against his fevered skin. "I'm staying right here," she said. "Until you're better." Vinny felt the contact like absolution. His free hand moved slow, hesitant, until it rested on Sophia's back. The gesture was small, almost imperceptible, but it carried everything he could not yet say. Outside, wind rattled the warehouse doors. Headlights swept the street once, slow searching, then moved on. Elena sat on the other side of Vinny, knees drawn to her chest. She watched her daughter's small hand rise and fall with his breathing, watched the powerful man who had once walked away now lie vulnerable before them, fever-bright eyes fixed on the child, as though she were the only anchor left in his world. In the quiet that followed, Elena spoke, voice so soft it barely carried. "She asks about you sometimes," she said. "Not by name. Just the picture man, the one who smiled in the old photo." Vinny closed his eyes. A tear escaped, unseen in the dark but real. "I never stopped thinking about her," he whispered. "About both of you." Elena's breath hitched. "Then why did you leave?" "Because I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid my world would destroy you. Instead, I let it destroy you anyway." The confession hung between them, raw, unbearable. Sophia stirred in her sleep, murmuring something soft and unintelligible. Her small fingers tightened on Vinny's shirt. Elena reached across, covered Sophia's hand with her own. Her fingers brushed Vinny's knuckles. For one suspended moment, no one moved. Then Elena spoke again, voice trembling but resolute. If you survive the night, she said, we talk, really talk, about everything. Vinny opened his eyes, met her gaze. I promise, he said. Outside, the wind howled on. Inside the cargo space of the Escalade, 3 people, 1 powerful beyond measure, 2 fragile beyond words, huddled together against the cold. And in the silence between heartbeats, the bond that had begun in a bodega deepened quietly, irrevocably, into something neither distance nor danger could ever break again. Dawn crept over Newark in thin, reluctant streaks of gray, the kind of light that revealed rather than warmed. The Escalade sat parked behind a nondescript warehouse on the edge of the Port District engine, off windows fogged from the breathing of 3 people inside. Vinny had drifted in and out of fevered sleep through the night. Each time he woke, it was to the soft weight of Sophia curled against his side, and Elena sitting vigil on the opposite bench, knees drawn up, eyes never closing for more than a few minutes at a time. The infection still burned beneath the makeshift bandage, but the fever had broken slightly enough for clarity to return in painful, jagged pieces. Vinny opened his eyes to find Sophia watching him. Her small face hovered inches away, serious and watchful. You're awake, she whispered, as though speaking too loudly might shatter him. He managed a faint nod. Yeah, kid. Elena stirred immediately. She leaned forward, hand reaching out instinctively to press against his forehead. Her touch was cool, careful. Fever's down, she said quietly. Relief flickered across her features, then vanished behind the guarded wall she had rebuilt overnight. Vinny pushed himself up slowly, every movement a negotiation with pain. He leaned against the cargo wall, breathing shallow. We can't stay here long. They'll be looking. Elena's gaze dropped to her hands. Who's they, Vinny? Hesitated. The truth had waited 10 years. It could wait a few more minutes. But Sophia's eyes, wide trusting, made delay feel like another betrayal. The tunnels, he said finally. Under your building. Old smuggling routes from the 20s. I used them once. Esposito wants them now. They're pressuring the landlord to clear tenants quietly, legally, if they can. Anyway, they have to if they can't. Elena's breath caught. The late notices. The broken heat. The maintenance visits that never fixed anything. Her voice cracked on the last word. It was never about rent. Vinny nodded once. They've been starving you out. 1 tenant at a time. You're the last one holding a lease that still has protections. Elena pressed a hand to her mouth. Tears welled, spilled, tracked silently down her cheeks. The realization struck her like a physical blow every sleepless night, counting pennies every skipped meal so Sophia could eat every humiliating conversation, with the landlord who smiled while tightening the noose. None of it had been random. It had been orchestrated, deliberate, cruel. Sophia reached for her mother's hand. Mom, Elena pulled her close, burying her face in Sophia's hair. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Vinny watched, helpless, gutted. Inside him, the storm reached new violence, remorse so sharp it stole his breath, guilt roaring that he had left them vulnerable to this slow, grinding cruelty. He had walked away believing he protected them from his enemies. Instead, he had left them to be preyed upon by the very kind of men he once commanded. He reached out, slow, tentative, until his fingers brushed Elena's arm. She flinched at first, then stilled. Allowed the touch. I'm ending it, he said quietly. Today. Elena lifted her head. Her eyes were red-rimmed, devastated. How Vinny pulled his phone from his coat pocket. The screen lit his face in cold blue. He typed a single message to a contact labeled simply, records. Then another. Then a third. Minutes passed in heavy silence. Sophia rested her head against Vinny's shoulder, small hand pressed to his chest as though monitoring his heartbeat. The gesture, so simple, so trusting, nearly undid him. The phone buzzed once, twice. Vinny read the incoming files in silence. Property records, lease histories, payment ledgers, doctored to show missed rent that had never been missed. Anonymous complaints filed with the city that mysteriously vanished after payoffs. And then the final document, a scanned letter from the landlord to an Esposito shell company confirming final tenant clearance imminent in exchange for a 6-figure finder's fee. Vinny's hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles blanched white. Elena watched his face change, saw the cold fury settle over features that had been softened by fever and tenderness only moments before. What is it? She asked. Vinny turned the screen toward her. She read in silence. When she reached the final line, her hand flew to her mouth. They were going to take the building, she whispered. Demolish it. And us. We would have been on the street. Again. Vinny's voice came out low, dangerous. They still might try. He sent one final message, this one to a different contact. Prep the exposure package. Full transparency. City Housing Authority, press contacts, federal tip line. Anonymized. Send in 30 minutes. Elena stared at him. You're going to burn them. I'm going to make sure they never touch you again. Sophia lifted her head. Will they go to jail? Vinny looked down at her, his daughter small and fierce, and impossibly kind despite everything. Some of them, he said softly. The rest will lose everything they value more than people. Outside, a car slowed on the street beyond the warehouse engine, idling headlights sweeping the shadows. Vinny tensed. Elena noticed pulled Sophia closer. The car lingered for 30 long seconds, then moved on. Vinny exhaled slowly. We need to move. Somewhere they can't find. Elena nodded, numb, disoriented. The world she had known for 10 years, struggle, endurance, quiet despair, had just cracked open to reveal deliberate malice beneath every hardship. The vertigo of it left her dizzy, nauseated. She had been powerless before. Now she felt the full, crushing weight of how systematically she had been made that way. Vinny started the engine. The Escalade purred to life, warm, safe, impossibly luxurious, compared to the freezing apartment they had fled. Elena looked around the interior as though seeing it for the first time, heated seats, soft lighting space, enough for 3 people to breathe. The disparity struck her again, violent, humiliating. She had spent winters taping blankets over windows, while this man drove vehicles worth more than her lifetime earnings. And yet here he sat bleeding and fevered, willing to risk everything for the child he had only just met. Tears spilled again, silent, unstoppable. Vinny glanced in the mirror, saw them, felt them like acid in his own chest. He reached back awkwardly, carefully, until his hand found hers. Elena stiffened, then slowly turned her palm up. Their fingers laced together. Sophia watched the gesture with wide eyes. A small, hopeful smile touched her lips. Vinny drove toward the highway, toward a safe house on the outskirts, an unremarkable colonial, with blackout curtains and 24-hour security cameras disguised as porch lights. No one would look for them there. As the city lights faded behind them, Vinny spoke, voice rough with emotion he could no longer contain. I should have come back sooner, he said. I told myself I was protecting you, but I was protecting myself, from seeing what my choices cost. Elena's thumb brushed across his knuckles, small, tentative. You're here now. Vinny swallowed hard. I'm here now. The Escalade merged onto the turnpike. Dawn broke fully pale gold light spilling across the dashboard, catching in Sophia's dark hair. Vinny glanced at her in the mirror. She met his eyes steady, trusting, loving in the uncomplicated way only children can love. Something inside him gave way, completely violent, final cleansing. He was no longer the man who walked away. He was the man who stayed. And whatever came next, however many enemies rose to meet him, he would face it with the same quiet ferocity he had once reserved for power alone. Only now that ferocity had a name. It had 2 names, and they were sleeping in the backseat of his car safe for the first time in years, because he had finally chosen them over everything else. The safe house stood on a quiet cul-de-sac in the northern suburbs of Newark. A 2-story colonial painted soft gray with black shutters, and a slate roof that caught the weak October sun of 2025 like polished stone. From the street, it looked ordinary, respectable, even exactly the kind of place no one would associate with a man whose name carried weight in shadowed rooms across the city. Inside, however, the house breathed quiet luxury hardwood floors gleaming under recessed lighting, a kitchen with granite counters and appliances that cost more than Elena had earned in the last 5 years, combined thick drapes that blocked every sliver of outside light. Vinny had carried Sophia inside first, still half asleep, small body limp with exhaustion, then returned for Elena. She had hesitated on the threshold, one foot on the polished welcome mat, the other still on cracked concrete, as though crossing the line would make everything irreversible. Now they sat in the living room. Sophia curled on the wide sectional sofa beneath a cashmere throw blanket softer than anything she had ever touched. Elena perched on the edge of an armchair, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles showed white against thin skin. Vinny stood near the window coat, discarded fresh shirt, already spotting red where the bandage had begun to seep again. He had refused rest, refused the painkillers Elena had found in the upstairs bathroom cabinet. He needed to stay sharp, needed to feel every ache as penance. The silence in the room was not empty. It thrummed with everything that had happened in the last 12 hours, the bodega, the blood, the chase, the revelation of deliberate cruelty beneath every hardship Elena had endured. She stared at the floor, wide plank, oak spotless, while memories assaulted her nights spent rocking Sophia through hunger cramps, mornings scraping frost from the inside of windows because the heat had been cut again, afternoons standing, in line at the food pantry praying the supply truck had arrived on time. Each memory now carried a new sting, knowing none of it had been chance. Someone had chosen to make her life smaller day by day, until she broke. Vinny watched her. Each tremor that crossed her face carved another wound in his chest. Remorse had become a living thing inside him, clawing relentless, refusing to be silenced. He had believed distance kept them safe. Instead, it had left them exposed to predators who wore suits and smiled while they starved families out of homes. The guilt was so violent it stole his breath. He had to brace one hand against the window frame to stay upright. Sophia stirred beneath the blanket. Her eyes opened slowly. She looked first at her mother, thin, trembling, then at Vinny, tall, powerful, bleeding through yet another shirt that probably cost more than their monthly rent. "You're still hurt," she said softly. Vinny managed a small smile. "I've had worse." Sophia sat up. The cashmere blanket pooled around her like a cloud. She slid off the sofa and crossed to him, small bare feet silent on the hardwood. Without hesitation, she reached up and placed her palm against his cheek, checking for fever the way Elena had taught her. "You're warm again," she said, worry creasing her brow. "You need to lie down." Vinny covered her hand with his own large, scarred gentle. "Soon," he promised. Elena watched the exchange. Something inside her cracked open, quiet, painful, irreversible. She had spent 10 years teaching Sophia caution, distant survival. And here her daughter stood touching a man she had known for less than a day, as though he were already family. The doorbell chimed, soft, melodic, utterly incongruous with the tension in the room. Vinny tensed. His hand moved instinctively toward the concealed holster he had not yet removed. Elena stood. "Who stay here?" Vinny said. He crossed to the foyer, checked the security feed on the wall panel. A single figure waited on the porch, a girl 9 years old, dark braids, oversized hoodie, eyes wide with fear and determination. Vinny opened the door. Maya Jackson stood there, Sophia's best friend from the tenement, the one who had once warned her to run from men like him. She clutched a small backpack, knuckles white around the straps. "I followed the car," she said, voice shaking but steady. "I saw you take them. I had to make sure Sophia was okay." Vinny studied her. "You walked here," Maya nodded. "Bus. Then I ran the rest. I know shortcuts." Elena appeared behind Vinny. "Maya," the girl's eyes filled with tears. "They came back to the building. Men in suits. They said the landlord sold it. Said we all have to be out by next week. My mom, she's crying. She won't stop." Elena's hand flew to her mouth. Vinny felt the words land like fresh bullets. He stepped aside. "Come in," he said quietly. Maya hesitated, gaze flicking between Vinny's blood-stained shirt and Sophia's hopeful face. Then she stepped across the threshold. The door closed behind her. Sophia ran forward. The two girls embraced fierce, wordless. Maya buried her face in Sophia's shoulder. Sophia held her as though she might disappear. Elena knelt beside them. "Your mom. Is she alone?" Maya nodded against Sophia. "She's scared. She said if we lose the apartment, we lose everything." Vinny watched. The scene tore at him, two small girls clinging to each other in a house that cost more than most people earned in lifetimes, while their mothers had spent years fighting just to keep roofs over their heads. The unfairness of it burned hotter than any fever. He stepped forward. "Maya," he said gently. The girl looked up, wary, defiant. "I'm not going to hurt you," Vinny continued. "Or Sophia. Or your mom. I promise." Maya studied him for a long moment. "You're bleeding." Vinny glanced down. "Old habit." Maya's eyes narrowed. "My uncle said men like you only help when they want something." Vinny knelt slowly, level with her now. "I want something," he admitted. "I want you and Sophia and your mom safe. That's all." Maya's lip trembled. Why Vinny looked past her to Elena, then to Sophia. "Because they're mine to protect." Maya followed his gaze. Saw the way Sophia looked at him, open, trusting, loving. Saw the way Elena watched him, conflicted, wounded but no longer running. Something shifted in Maya's expression, small, fragile, but real. Vinny stood. "I need to make a call. Stay here." He stepped into the hallway, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number he had not used in months. A voice answered on the second ring. "Moretti." Vinny spoke low. "I need leverage on Esposito. Full package financials, communications, the tunnel permits. Everything. And I need it delivered to the Housing Authority and the U.S. Attorney's Office by noon." A pause. "That's going to burn bridges. They burned mine first." Vinny ended the call, returned to the living room. Maya had moved closer to Sophia on the sofa. Elena sat between them, one arm around each girl. Vinny knelt again, this time in front of Maya. "I'm going to stop them," he said. "Today. But I need you to trust me. Just a little longer." Maya searched his face. "If you're lying?" "I'm not." Maya exhaled shakily. Then slowly she reached out and placed her small hand on his arm. The touch was tentative testing. Vinny felt it like fire, pure cleansing. Two children, one his by blood, one chosen by loyalty, trusting him despite everything they had been taught about men like him. Elena watched the moment unfold. Tears slipped down her cheeks again, silent, grateful. Outside, a car passed slowly on the quiet street, headlights sweeping the house once, then moving on. Vinny rose. "Rest," he told them. "I'll keep watch." He moved to the window, back to the room, eyes scanning the street. Behind him, 3 small hearts beat in the same quiet rhythm, trust, growing fragile, but fierce in the space he had once believed could never hold anything soft. And inside Vinny, the storm had not quieted. It had only found purpose. The safe house kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and warm bread, simple things Vinny had ordered delivered at dawn through a discreet service that never asked questions. Sunlight filtered through half-closed blinds and slanted gold bars across the granite island, catching on the chrome appliances and the crystal pitcher of orange juice that cost more per bottle than Elena had spent on groceries in a month. She stood at the counter, thin fingers wrapped around a ceramic mug so large it dwarfed her hands, staring at the steam rising in slow spirals. Sophia and Maya sat side by side at the breakfast bar on tall stools they could barely reach, sharing a plate of scrambled eggs and toast cut into neat triangles. The girls ate carefully small bites, savoring each one as though afraid the food might disappear. Vinny leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching them. He had changed into a fresh black sweater and dark jeans. The new bandage beneath was already spotting faintly, but he ignored it. The pain was distant now, secondary to the ache in his chest that had nothing to do with torn flesh. Elena lifted her eyes to his. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. "All of it." Vinny's voice came out rough. "I did." She looked away first, back to the mug, to the steam, to anything but the man who had spent the night bleeding in the back of his own vehicle, while 2 children tended him with hands that shook from cold and hunger. The doorbell chimed again, soft, polite, utterly wrong in the context of everything that had happened. Vinny straightened. "Stay here." He crossed to the foyer, checked the security feed. A courier in plain clothes waited outside, black cap, no insignia, a slim envelope in one hand. Vinny opened the door just wide enough. The man handed over the package without a word and left. Inside the envelope, printed copies of everything Vinny had requested. Bank transfers from Esposito shell companies to the landlord. Emails coordinating tenant relocation incentives that were never offered. Forged utility shut-off notices backdated to coincide with rent demands. A single photo grainy taken from across the street of the landlord accepting an envelope from a man in an expensive suit. Time-stamped 3 weeks ago. Vinny carried the papers back to the kitchen. He spread them across the island. Elena set her mug down. Her hands trembled as she scanned the pages. When she reached the photo, her breath stopped. "That's him," she whispered. "The one who came to the door last month. Said the building was being sold. Said we had 30 days. Vinny's jaw tightened. "They were never going to let you stay." Elena pressed her palms flat against the granite hard enough that her knuckles blanched. "I begged him," she said, voice cracking. "I stood in that hallway and begged for 1 more week. I told him Sophia was sick. I told him we had nowhere else." Tears fell onto the papers, smudging ink. He smiled. He said business is business. Sophia slid off her stool. She wrapped her arms around her mother's waist. Maya followed, hesitant at first, then fierce until both girls held Elena between them. Vinny watched. The sight tore something fundamental loose inside him. Remorse so violent it blurred his vision. He had known men like that landlord, had done business with them, had told himself his world operated on different rules. But the rules had always been the same. Power took, weakness paid. He stepped forward. "Elena." She looked up, eyes red, face streaked but steady. "I'm ending it," he said again. "Right now." He pulled out his phone. Dialed a number from memory. A voice answered, calm, professional. "Line secure. Release the package," Vinny said. "Full distribution. Housing authority, local news, federal tip line. No redactions. Understood. Sending now." Vinny ended the call. Set the phone down. Elena stared at him. "What happens next?" "They lose everything," Vinny said quietly. "The landlord loses the building. Esposito loses the tunnels. And anyone who signed off on starving families to make a profit loses their freedom." Sophia lifted her head. Like jail, Vinny knelt to her level. Like consequences. Maya's voice came small but clear. "My mom. She's still there. Alone." Vinny looked at her, really looked. Saw the fear behind the defiance, the love behind the suspicion. "I'm getting her out," he said. "Today." He stood. "I need to go back. Make sure the message is received. In person." Elena's hand shot out, grabbed his sleeve. "No. You're still bleeding. You can barely stand." Vinny covered her hand with his own. "I've stood through worse." Her fingers tightened. "Not for us." Vinny felt the contact sear through him, her touch small and desperate, anchoring him in a way nothing else ever had. Love burned brighter than pain, brighter than guilt, brighter than anything he had ever known. "I'm going," he said gently. "Because if I don't finish this, they'll keep coming. And I won't let that happen." Elena released him slowly. Tears spilled again, silent, endless. Vinny knelt once more, this time before all three of them. To Sophia, I'll be back before dark. Promise. To Maya, your mom's coming here. Safe. With you. To Elena, you're not alone anymore. He stood. Took one last look at them, three small figures in a house too big, too clean, too safe, and walked out. The drive back to the Ironbound felt endless. Every block reminded him of what he had left behind, thin children playing on cracked sidewalks, mothers carrying laundry in plastic bags because washers were broken again, men standing on corners with nothing left to lose. He parked 2 streets over, walked the rest. The tenement loomed ahead, familiar broken waiting. He saw them before they saw him, 3 Esposito men on the stoop suits, too nice for the neighborhood, voices low and confident. One held a clipboard, eviction notices fresh printed. Vinny stepped into the open. They froze. Moretti, the lead man, said, "You're late to the party." Vinny stopped 10 feet away. "Party's over," the man laughed, short, nervous. "Buildings sold. Tenants out by end of week. Legal." Vinny pulled the envelope from his coat, held it up. "Not anymore." He tossed it at their feet. Papers scattered, proof dates, signatures, dollar amounts. The lead man bent to pick one up. "Read." Color drained from his face. Vinny's voice stayed calm. "Your boss is about to lose more than tunnels. He's about to lose everything." One of the other men stepped forward, hand drifting toward his coat. Vinny's eyes narrowed. "Don't." The man hesitated, looked at the papers blowing across the sidewalk, looked at Vinny bleeding, fevered but utterly unafraid. They backed away. Vinny watched them retreat to their car, watched them drive off. Then he turned to the building. Maya's mother stood in the doorway, thin, trembling eyes wide with shock. Vinny approached slowly. "Ma'am." She stared at him. "You're him?" Vinny nodded once. "Maya's safe. Sophia's safe. Elena's safe. I'm taking you to them." Tears filled her eyes. Why, Vinny looked past her at the dark hallway, the flickering bulb, the stairs he had climbed as a boy himself. "Because no one should live like this," he said quietly. "Not anymore." He offered his hand. She took it, small, shaking. Vinny led her down the steps, to the waiting escalade. Inside the safe house, Elena paced the living room. Sophia and Maya sat on the sofa, holding hands, watching the clock. The front door opened. Elena froze. Vinny stepped inside, blood on his sweater, exhaustion carved deep into his face. Behind him, Maya's mother. Maya cried out, ran forward. The two embraced, fierce, sobbing, wordless. Elena crossed to Vinny, stopped inches away. "You did it," she whispered. Vinny nodded. "They're done." Elena reached up, hesitant, touched his cheek. "You're burning up again." Vinny covered her hand with his own. "Worth it." Sophia slipped between them, wrapped her arms around Vinny's waist. Maya joined then her mother. Vinny stood in the center, 4 small figures holding him upright. Inside him, the storm had not ended. It had only changed shape. From destruction to redemption, from guilt to grace, from alone to home. And as the sun climbed higher over Newark, Vinny closed his eyes, felt their warmth, their trust, their love, and understood finally what sacrifice really meant. It meant everything. The afternoon sun of late October, 2025, slanted through the tall windows of the safe house, painting long golden rectangles across the living room floor. Dust motes drifted lazily in the light, catching and sparkling like tiny stars. The house was quiet, too quiet after the morning's rush of emotion and arrival. Sophia and Maya had fallen asleep on the sectional sofa, tangled together beneath the cashmere, small chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Elena sat in the armchair across from them, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around herself as though the room's warmth could not quite reach her bones. She had not spoken since Vinny returned with Maya's mother. She had simply watched him, silent, watchful eyes filled with a storm she could not yet name. Vinny stood at the kitchen island back to the living room, staring down at his phone. The screen showed a single, unread message from a number he knew too well, his second-in-command, Marco, the man who had stood beside him through every war, every deal, every narrow escape. The preview line read, "We need to talk. Now." Vinny's thumb hovered over the screen. Something cold coiled in his gut, not fear exactly, but recognition, the same instinct that had kept him alive for decades. He opened the message. "Boss, it's me." Esposito didn't act alone. Someone inside gave them the tunnel maps. Someone who knew where you'd be last night. "Meet me at the old dockyard on the river. Alone. 30 minutes. Vinny's hand tightened around the phone until the case creaked. He looked back at the sofa, 2 sleeping girls, Elena watching him with quiet, haunted eyes. He crossed the room, knelt beside the armchair. "I have to go out," he said softly. Elena's fingers dug into her arms. "No, it's necessary." Her voice cracked. "You're still bleeding. You can barely walk straight." Vinny reached out slow, careful, until his palm cupped her cheek. Elena flinched at first, then leaned into the touch. Tears welled again, silent and relentless. "I'll be back," he promised. "Before dark." Elena searched his face. "You always say that." Vinny's throat closed. "This time I mean it." He stood, took his coat from the hook by the door, fresh blood already spotting the lining where the old bandage had failed again. He looked one last time at Sophia, curled small and trusting, and felt the familiar tear inside him. Widen love so fierce it hurt, guilt so deep it drowned him. Remorse that screamed he did not deserve this fragile, perfect thing he had only just found. He stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air. The dockyard smelled of salt and diesel and rotting pilings. Gulls wheeled overhead, crying sharp and mournful. Rusted cranes stood like skeletal sentinels along the riverbank. Abandoned shipping containers formed a maze of red and blue steel. Vinny walked the narrow path between them, coat open hand, resting near the holster he had finally strapped on again. Marco waited at the end of the longest pier back to the water, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched against the wind. He turned when he heard footsteps. "Boss," he said, voice steady, too steady. Vinny stopped 10 feet away. "Talk." Marco exhaled a short, almost regretful sound. "I gave Esposito the tunnel schematics. The night you were at the tenement. Told them where you'd be parked." Vinny felt the words land like a second bullet, clean, precise through the heart. Why Marco looked away out at the gray river, the slow-moving barges, the city skyline rising in the distance like a promise no one kept. "Because you were going soft," he said quietly. "Because you walked into that building and came out carrying a kid like she was yours. Because I saw you look at that woman like she still mattered. And I knew once you started caring again, the whole thing would come down. The family, the business, everything we built." Vinny's hand dropped from his coat. "You sold me out." Marco met his eyes. "I saved us. Esposito promised protection. A bigger cut. A future without you dragging us into sentiment." Silence stretched cold absolute. Vinny felt the fracture inside him reach breaking point. Remorse had been a constant companion for days. Now it became something sharper, more vicious betrayal from the one man he had trusted with his life. The man who had carried messages, stood guard, pulled triggers when Vinny could not. The man who had always known about the photograph Vinny kept hidden in his desk drawer, the one of a younger Elena smiling in sunlight. "You knew about Sophia," Vinny said. Not a question. Marco nodded once. "I knew. I figured it out years ago. And when you started bleeding for her, literally I knew you'd burn it all down for them. So I burned you first." Vinny took one step forward. "You were going to let them take her." Marco's jaw tightened. "I was going to let them take leverage. A kid's a powerful lever. You'd have come back in line. You always do." Vinny felt the world narrow to a single point. The man in front of him, the river behind him, the safe house 20 minutes away, where 3 small lives waited for him to return. He drew his weapon, slow, deliberate. Marco did not flinch. "You won't shoot me. Not after everything." Vinny's finger rested on the trigger guard. "I thought the same thing about you." Wind off the river whipped at their coats. Gulls screamed overhead. Marco spoke again, soft, almost pleading. "We built this together. You and me. From nothing." Vinny's voice came out raw. "We built it on trust. You broke it." Marco's eyes filled, sudden, unexpected. "I did what I had to." Vinny lowered the gun slowly, painfully. "So do I." He stepped closer. Marco tensed. Vinny stopped inches away, looked into the eyes of the man who had once been brother in all but blood. "You're done," Vinny said quietly. "The package is already out. By tonight, Esposito's finished. The tunnels are exposed. The feds will have everything. And you—" He reached out fast, disarmed Marco with a single practiced move. The gun clattered onto the pier. "You get to live," Vinny finished. "Because I'm not you." Marco stared at him. Shock, disbelief, something close to gratitude warring across his face. Vinny turned away, walked back toward the street. Behind him, Marco called out, voice breaking. "What about the family?" Vinny did not stop. "There is no family anymore. Only what's left." He reached the Escalade, climbed inside, started the engine. The drive back felt longer than the night before. Every block replayed the betrayal, Marco's steady voice, the calm admission, the cold calculation behind eyes Vinny had trusted for decades. When he pulled into the driveway of the safe house, the sun was low, orange, and heavy. He sat for a long moment, forehead against the steering wheel, breathing through the pain in his side and the deeper pain in his chest. The front door opened. Sophia ran out barefoot, hair wild, straight into his arms as he stepped onto the driveway. "You came back," she whispered against his neck. Vinny held her tight, fierce trembling. "Always." Elena appeared in the doorway, thin silhouette against warm light eyes searching his face. She saw the fresh blood on his sweater, saw the exhaustion carved deep into every line. She crossed the driveway, stopped in front of him. "What happened?" she asked softly. Vinny looked down at Sophia, his daughter, then up at Elena. "Someone I trusted tried to take you from me," he said. "He failed." Elena reached up, slow, careful, touched the side of his face. "You're shaking," she whispered. Vinny closed his eyes, felt her palm cool, steady against his fevered skin. "I'm home," he said. And in that single sentence, 3 small words, the storm inside him reached its breaking point. Not destruction, not guilt, redemption. He opened his eyes, looked at Elena, looked at Sophia, still clinging to him. Then he looked past them to Maya and her mother, standing in the doorway, watching with wide, hopeful eyes. Vinny spoke, voice rough, certain. "No one touches this family again." And as the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the safe house in shades of fire and gold, Vincent Moretti understood finally completely what it meant to choose love over power. It meant everything. Night fell over the safe house like a heavy curtain, the October darkness of 2025 pressing against the windows with quiet insistence. Inside the living room, lamps cast warm pools of light across the hardwood, turning the space into something almost gentle, almost safe. Sophia and Maya had finally drifted off again on the sectional, small limbs tangled beneath the cashmere, throw faces slack with the deep sleep only children can reach after days of fear. Elena sat beside them, one hand resting lightly on each girl's back, her own eyes open and unblinking. She had not moved in hours. Vinny lay on the wide leather recliner across the room, propped up with pillows Elena had arranged with careful hands. The fresh bandage she had taped on after his return from the dockyard was already darkening again. Fever had returned in slow, insidious waves. His breathing came, shallow, labored. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air. He had refused the hospital again, too many questions, too many records, too much risk of Esposito remnants finding them before the dust settled. Instead, he stayed here, in this borrowed house that smelled of lemon polish and new beginnings, bleeding quietly, while the people he had sworn to protect watched him fade. Elena rose once to check his temperature back, of her thin hand pressed to his cheek, then his neck. She said nothing, only returned to the sofa with a small shake of her head. Her eyes, when they met his, were red-rimmed and steady. She had cried herself empty sometime after midnight. Now only quiet determination remained. Sophia woke first. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes with small fists. The room was dim, except for the single lamp beside Vinny's chair. She looked at her mother, curled protectively around Maya, then at Vinny. He was too still. Sophia slipped off the sofa, bare feet silent on the hardwood. She crossed the room like a small ghost hoodie, sleeves slipping down over her hands. She stopped beside the recliner. Vinny's eyes were half open, glassy with fever. His chest rose and fell too slowly. Blood had seeped through the bandage in a fresh, dark bloom. Sophia reached out hesitant, touched his hand. It was burning. "Dad," she whispered. The word slipped out, soft, accidental, perfect. Vinny's eyes focused slowly, painfully on her face. Sophia's lip trembled. "You're really sick." Vinny tried to smile. It came out crooked, weak. "I'm okay, kid." She shook her head. "No, you're not." Elena stirred at the sound. She sat up, blinking against the dim light. But Sophia had already moved. She climbed onto the wide recliner, careful small knees, finding space beside Vinny's hip. She knelt there, small hands hovering over the blood-soaked bandage. Tears filled her eyes, sudden, huge, spilling over. "You saved us," she said, voice cracking. "So many times. Now it's my turn." Vinny tried to speak, tried to tell her no, to get down to stay safe, but the words caught in his throat. Fever had stolen his strength. Love had stolen his resistance. Sophia pressed both palms flat against the bandage, directly over the wound. She pressed hard, harder than a 9-year-old should know how, trying to stop what she could not understand. Vinny gasped, sharp, involuntary. Pain flared, white-hot, but beneath it something else. Warmth, small, fierce, innocent. Elena rose fast, panicked. "Sophia, no." But Sophia looked up at her mother with eyes that held no fear, only certainty. "He's my dad," she said simply. "He can't go away." Elena froze. The word dad hung in the air between them like a bell struck once clear and final. Vinny's hand lifted, slow, trembling, until it covered Sophia's smaller ones. Tears slipped from the corners of his eyes, silent, unstoppable. "I'm not going anywhere," he rasped. Sophia leaned forward, pressed her forehead against his chest, right over his heart, listened to the unsteady rhythm. "You have to stay," she whispered. "Because I just found you." Vinny felt the world narrow to the weight of her small, warm, impossibly brave. Inside him the storm reached its zenith, guilt and remorse and love colliding so violently he could not breathe. He had spent decades building walls against this exact feeling. Now every brick crumbled beneath a child's touch. Elena crossed the room, slow shaking. She knelt beside the recliner, reached out hesitant until her hand rested on Sophia's back, then slid to Vinny's shoulder. "He needs help," she said, voice breaking. "Real help." Vinny shook his head weakly. "No hospitals." Elena's eyes filled again. "Then what?" Sophia lifted her head, looked at her mother, looked at Vinny. "I have the same blood," she said quietly. "I heard the nurse say it once when I had to get stitches. Same rare type. Mom said it's special." Vinny's breath stopped. Elena stared at her daughter, shock, horror, dawning understanding crashing across her face. Sophia turned back to Vinny. "If you need blood, you can have mine." Vinny's voice cracked. "No." Sophia pressed harder against the bandage. "Yes." Elena's hand tightened on Vinny's shoulder. "She's right," she whispered. "Same type. Same everything." Vinny closed his eyes. Tears slipped free, hot, relentless. "I can't ask that." "You're not asking," Sophia said softly. "I'm giving." The room went still, only the sound of breathing, three people holding one fragile moment between them. Vinny opened his eyes, looked at Sophia, really looked, saw himself in her stubborn chin, her dark eyes, her quiet courage, saw Elena in the gentle curve of her cheek, the way she never looked away. He reached up, slow trembling, until his palm cupped Sophia's face. "Okay," he whispered, "but only if a doctor says it's safe." Sophia nodded once, small, solemn. Elena stood. "I'll call someone. Discreet. Someone who owes you." Vinny caught her wrist gently. "Thank you." Elena leaned down, pressed her forehead to his brief burning. "Don't thank me," she whispered. "Just live." She stepped away, pulled out her phone with shaking hands. Sophia stayed where she was, small body pressed to Vinny's side, hands still over the wound as though sheer will could hold him here. Vinny looked down at her, his daughter felt the final fracture give way. Not pain, not guilt. Peace. Deep, aching, overwhelming peace. He wrapped one arm around her, careful, reverent. "I love you," he said, voice rough, certain true. Sophia's eyes filled again. She buried her face against his chest. "I love you too, Dad." Outside, wind rattled the windows, cold, relentless. Inside, warmth spread slow, steady, unbreakable. Elena returned phone still in hand. "Someone's coming," she said. 20 minutes. Vinny nodded weakly. He looked at Sophia, then at Elena, then at the two sleeping girls on the sofa. Family. Not the one he had built with money and fear. The one he had found, bloodied, exhausted, perfect in the ruins of everything he thought he knew. And as the minutes ticked toward dawn, Vinny held his daughter close, felt her heartbeat against his own, and understood finally what it meant to be saved. Not by power, not by wealth, by love small, fierce, and fearless enough to climb onto a dying man's lap and refuse to let go. The days following Sophia's desperate act blurred into a quiet rhythm of recovery and revelation. A discreet doctor, summoned through Vinny's oldest, most trusted contacts, arrived at the safe house before dawn, with a portable medical kit, sterile equipment, and the kind of calm that only comes from years of handling emergencies no one else could know about. He confirmed Sophia's blood type, matched Vinny's exactly. The emergency transfusion, though unconventional and risky in any other setting, had stabilized him long enough for antibiotics and proper wound care to take hold. The doctor left without questions, only a quiet nod to Vinny and a gentle word to Elena. "He's strong, but he needs rest and people." Vinny rested, truly rested for the first time in decades. Not the guarded half-sleep of a man expecting a knife in the dark, but the deep, dreamless kind that comes when the body finally believes it is safe. He slept on the wide recliner in the living room, surrounded by the soft sounds of Sophia and Maya, whispering to each other on the sofa, Elena moving quietly in the kitchen, preparing simple meals from groceries delivered in unmarked boxes, fresh fruit, warm bread, milk that did not need to be rationed. The house filled slowly with ordinary life, the smell of oatmeal on the stove, the patter of small feet, the occasional burst of laughter when Maya taught Sophia how to braid friendship bracelets from colorful threads Elena had found in a drawer. Vinny watched it all from his chair, weak at first, then stronger each day. He watched Elena move through the kitchen with hesitant grace, learning to trust the stocked refrigerator, the endless hot water, the absence of eviction notices taped to the door. He watched Sophia and Maya chase each other through the hallway, their voices echoing off walls that had never known children's play before. He watched Elena sit beside him in the evenings, silent at first, then speaking in small, careful sentences about the years he had missed. Sophia's first steps on cracked linoleum, her first lost tooth under a pillow with no money for the tooth fairy, the nights Elena held her while she cried from hunger and cold. Each story landed like a fresh wound, and each one healed something deeper. Vinny listened without interruption, tears slipping silently down his face more than once. The remorse that had torn him open for days now softened into something gentler, more bearable. Sorrow, yes, but sorrow tempered by gratitude. Gratitude that he had been given time to make it right. One evening, as the sky outside turned the deep indigo of early November, Vinny called them all into the living room. He sat upright, now no longer propped by pillows, his color returning the bandage finally clean and dry. Elena settled on the sofa between the girls. Maya's mother took the armchair, still thin and wary but beginning to smile more often. Vinny looked at each of them, really looked. "I've spent most of my life collecting things," he began quietly. "Power, money, loyalty. I thought those were the only things that lasted." He paused, voice thickening. "I was wrong." He reached into the pocket of his sweater, slow, careful, and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside 4 simple gold rings, plain bands, no diamonds, no flash. 1 adult size for Elena, 1 slightly smaller for Maya's mother, 2 tiny ones for the girls. He held the box out. "These aren't payment," he said. "They're promises. I want to adopt Sophia legally, openly, forever. I want Maya and her mother to stay here or wherever feels like home for as long as they want. No strings, no debts, just family." Elena's hand flew to her mouth. Tears spilled immediately, silent, overwhelming. Sophia stared at the rings with wide eyes. Maya reached out, first tentative, then took 1 small band and slipped it onto her finger. Vinny looked at Elena. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight. I don't expect anything. I just want the chance to be the man you both deserved from the beginning." Elena stood slowly, trembling. She crossed to him, knelt so they were eye to level. "You already are," she whispered. She took the ring from the box, slipped it onto her finger. Then she leaned forward, hesitant, reverent, and kissed his forehead. Vinny closed his eyes, felt the touch like sunlight after endless winter. Sophia climbed onto his lap, careful of the healing wound. Maya followed. Their mother stood beside Elena, tears streaming, smiling through them. Vinny wrapped his arms around the girls, strong, now steady. He looked at Elena over their heads. "I love you," he said, simple, certain, true. "All of you. No matter what color skin we have, no matter where we started, no matter how much money sits in bank accounts or how many nights we spent cold and hungry. Love doesn't see poverty. Love doesn't see power. Love just sees family." Elena nodded, tears falling freely. "And family stays." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft, silent, covering the world in white. Inside, 4 rings gleamed in the lamplight, small, plain, unbreakable. Weeks turned to months. Vinny stepped back from the day-to-day violence of his old life, delegating to men he still trusted, closing doors on deals that once defined him. He kept enough influence to protect what mattered most, but his days filled with quieter things: school drop-offs, bedtime stories, Saturday mornings, making pancakes with too much syrup. Elena began night classes, nursing something she had dreamed of before life narrowed her choices. Maya's mother entered a treatment program. Slowly, steadily, she began to heal. And through it all, Vinny carried the lessons he had learned the hard way. Knowledge is the quiet light that shows us where we went wrong and where we can go right. Knowledge reminds us that every choice leaves echoes. Knowledge teaches that compassion is strength, not weakness. Lesson after lesson settled deep that real power protects the vulnerable instead of exploiting them, that true wealth is measured in trust and laughter, around a table that education of the heart of the mind can redeem even the darkest pasts. Lesson upon lesson, forgiveness is not forgetting but choosing to build again. Lesson after lesson, love crosses every divide, skin color, bank balance, history itself. Lesson upon lesson, the greatest education comes not from books or streets, but from the small hands that refuse to let go when the world says give up. This story reminds us that knowledge opens doors we never knew existed, that lesson after lesson shapes who we become, that education of the soul can turn even the hardest hearts soft again. To everyone watching this video, may you have good health, a joyful life, and daily peace. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. We upload engaging stories every day, stories about hope, redemption, and the unbreakable power of love. Tell me in the comments, how did this story make you feel? Does it connect to something real in your own life? Share whatever rises from deep within your heart. I read every comment, and your emotions matter here. Goodbye for now, and I promise I'll see you again in the next video. Disclaimer: all stories on this channel are fictional and created solely for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental.